In Super Smash Bros., stages are a staple. They make up the environment in which you fight and can add some real zest to any battle. They come in many different forms. We have ones that scroll, transform, take you on a tour, are really big, have a crap load of gimmicks, and many, many more. Obviously, there are some stages I love, some that I hate, and some that are just meh. Now that we have all the DLC for Smash Ultimate, I've decided to rank all these stages from worst to best. But before we start, the rules. For the stages that appear in multiple Smash games, I will only be counting their latest appearance. For example, instead of having one entry for each Smash game's battlefield, final destination, etc., I'll only talk about the Ultimate version, since they are pretty much all the exact same as each other, with only aesthetic differences. Also, there will be 4 fighters per stage, and the stages will be in their original forms, and not Battlefield or Omega, with items turned off and hazards turned on. In other words, I'll be judging these stages based on how fun they are to play in the For Fun format. Why? Because whenever I play in the For Glory format, or in other words, a serious game of Smash, it's usually on FD or Battlefield, or any other stage in Omega or Battlefield form. Said forms don't show a stage in its true glory, so therefore, I think it's only fair to rank them this way. And finally, like always, this is purely my opinion and no one else's. Alright, that's it for this long-winded intro, so let's get started. MIIVERSE. This stage is literally just Battlefield with a fresh coat of paint, a big, flat platform below, and 3 smaller ones floating above. However, the reason it's my least favorite is because it used to be so much cooler, back when the MIIVERSE app was still running on the Wii U. Actual posts that people had made about any of the characters currently in the match would appear, which made this stage really interesting, but now that MIIVERSE has been discontinued, it's just boring, and as long as Battlefield exists, ultimately pointless to play on. 131, 75M. I've always hated this stage. Its big size isn't a problem, it's more that the platforms you have to fight on are pretty small, and they're all over the place, so much so that it feels more like you're trying to keep from falling in the pit below, rather than KO your opponents. And what doesn't help are the constant onslaught of trampolines fired off by 8-bit DK, plus the lava bubbles that can sometimes appear. Most times, it feels like I just hang around on the top platform and wait for opponents to come to me, so most of the stage is virtually wasted. 130, Icicle Mountain, and here we have our first scrolling stage. Typically, I don't mind scrolling stages, but this one scrolls at varying speeds, with its top speed being pretty fast for 1, and 2, it scrolls vertically rather than horizontally, which means you have to keep jumping or descending to avoid falling behind and getting forced into the upper or lower blast lines. So it's as if you're fighting both your opponents and the stage, which, if you ask me, ruins the experience. Also, the ice physics really don't help. This is definitely a stage that I'm glad didn't come back in Ultimate. 129, Rumble Falls, another scrolling stage. I dislike this one for pretty much the same reasons as Icicle Mountain, because it scrolls vertically, which means you have to worry more about surviving than KOing. However, this one is a bit better since it only scrolls upwards, and it doesn't seem to scroll quite as fast, which makes it a bit easier to keep up with. There are also some spikes that can potentially one-hit KO you if you touch them, which keeps you on your toes. However, if a stage scrolls vertically, it's highly unlikely to tickle my fancy. Another stage that I'm glad was cut for Ultimate. 128, Moray Towers. This stage has an odd layout. For 1, it's really tall, and 2, there are several diagonal platforms for you to fight on, so therefore, fighting on this stage just feels awkward. Also, there are no fun gimmicks, or gimmicks period, so it lacks any real substance. More simply, it's boring. I don't know much about Splatoon, but I feel like Sakurai and the gang could have made a much better Splatoon stage if they'd just chosen a cooler location from said game. I will say the scenery's pretty cool, but that's the only thing I like about it. 127, Yoshi's Island Melee. For starters, this stage is pretty small, and the layout is kind of weird. On the right side is a hill that extends past the right blast line, and on the left side are a couple of jumbled pipes next to a pitfall. It has 3 rows of blocks that, if hit, will temporarily be unable to be stood upon. These blocks seem to serve no purpose other than just getting in the way, so given the awkward platforming and layout and small size, fighting on this stage just feels uncomfortable. Really should have paid your taxes to get a better stage, Yoshi. 126, Dracula's Castle. This stage is similar to Yoshi's Island's Melee. It's small and cramped, with an awkward layout. There's a slope on the right side and a pitfall on the left, with 2 floating platforms in the center. This one is a bit better than Yoshi's Island, since its layout is a little less awkward, but I still don't really like it enough to give it a better spot. Again, I don't know a lot about Castlevania, but surely there must have been more cooler areas that could have been used to make a Smash stage based on it. 125, Congo Falls. Again, this stage is quite small, and the only platforming you have to fight on are several small ones arranged in a particular way, so again, fighting on this stage feels awkward. However, not quite as much as the previous 2, and along with that, there's also a cannon that hovers around the bottom of the stage, which could potentially save you from falling into the lower blast line. I like gimmicks like this, so those 2 reasons are why Congo Falls is a little better than Yoshi's Island and Dracula's Castle. I still semi-dislike it though. 124. Brinstar Depths. This whole stage is shaped kind of like a potato, with a few other smaller platforms floating around it. When Kraid shows up, he'll slowly rotate the entire stage, which means you have to be careful not to fall off if a slope you're standing on becomes too steep. Because of this, fighting on this stage feels awkward, and it's another one where there's a slightly bigger emphasis on surviving than actually fighting. However, it's a bit easier to survive on this one since there's no scrolling, but it's not good enough to get a better spot than this. 123. Shadow Moses Island. This is another small stage, although this time there's no awkward layout to worry about. Also, the walls on either side are breakable, which will make the stage a little bigger, as well as open up the side blast zones. But that's all there is to this one. It lacks any real substance, so it's honestly just a boring stage. I might have been inclined to put it higher if it weren't so small, but it is what it is. Once again, I don't know much about Metal Gear, but surely they could have picked a location from the series that would have made for a much more interesting Smash stage. 122. Onett. This stage takes place in a little city, emphasis on little. The size is quite small, and there's also a good amount of blocked off space due to the buildings. Cars can also drive by, which cause major knockback to fighters they hit. Additionally, the drugstore has two awnings that, when landed on enough times, will, like the blocks in Yoshi's Island Melee, become unable to be landed on again for a short time. So with all that, when I fight on this stage, it just feels really cramped, so I tend to stay away from it. 121. Gower Plain. Small stages are one thing, but extremely big ones are another. This one has many platforms, two big ones at the top, and several smaller ones directly below. In said lower area, there's also a lot of open space, which could make it easy to fall into the lower blast line. Also, when night falls, Metalface will appear, and he can both hit and be hit, and once hit enough times, he'll explode, which can cause a lot of damage to anyone except whoever landed the finishing blow. The fact that this stage is so big and has a lot of wasted space is why I don't really like it. 120. Suzaku Castle. This stage feels kind of like Battlefield with the platforms moved around. You have a big platform on the lower right and three smaller ones on the top and bottom left, plus a ladder. I don't really mind this questionable stage layout, but what I do mind is that the size is pretty small. At least in Battlefield, you have a good amount of open space, but here, that's just not the case. I mean, this one does have some open space, but not as much as Battlefield, so that's why I don't really like it. 119. Mushroom Kingdom 2. Basically speaking, this stage is just three platforms separated by two pitfalls and is quite small. The blast zones are all pretty close by, and to make matters worse, Birdo can appear and shoot eggs, which can damage players they hit. While it is awesome that Super Mario Bros. 2 has a stage based off it, the stage itself doesn't do the game justice. And side note, it's also pretty boring. If it were bigger, it might have made it higher on this list, but darn shame, especially for a Mario stage. 118. Mushroom Kingdom Melee. This one kind of has a similar layout to Mushroom Kingdom 2. Three platforms separated by two pitfalls. However, there are also brick blocks and weight platforms for some extra platforming options. That's one reason why it's a bit better, along with the fact that it's overall a little bigger. But there's not much to this stage beyond that. Although the bigger size makes it more practical, there's no other substance to make it any less boring. If it had a few gimmicks like 2's Birdo, it might have placed better, but once again, damn shame. 117. Mushroom Kingdom. This one is mostly the same as MK Melee, except there are pipes that players can go through to warp to the other side of the stage, plus a POW block that, when hit, damages any opponents on the ground. So with those new additions, plus the fact that this one's layout is a bit more fun, this Mushroom Kingdom is just a little better than Melee's version, but the overall small size and lack of any really fun gimmicks makes it just a meh stage for me. 116. Boxing Ring. This stage consists of a boxing ring, hence the name, in the middle, with each side having a floor instead of pitfalls and open space. There's also a light fixture hanging over the ring, and by using the ring's ropes as a trampoline, players can get up onto it and attack it until it falls down. Anyone the fixture falls on will suffer a good amount of knockback. However, that's the only real substance this stage has. It's otherwise bland and boring. I do like how the Jumbotron gives every Smash character nicknames, but that's not enough to secure the stage a higher spot. 115. Mario Galaxy. This one is similar in layout to Boxing Ring, only it's curved, with a couple small platforms floating above the ground. This one slightly beats out Boxing Ring because the scenery is nicer and the platforming is consistent throughout the whole stage, but even so, it's still relatively boring, and as you may have noticed by now, I'm not really a fan of stages where the ground extends past the side blast lines instead of just having pitfalls. I don't know much about— oh wait a minute, yes I do! Super Mario Galaxy, both 1 and 2, are amazing games. They deserve a Smash stage much better than this. Ugh. 114. Wii Fit Studio. This one is basically the exact same as Mario Galaxy in terms of layout, with the only real difference being that it's flat instead of curved, thus making it a bit more comfortable to fight on. That's literally the only reason why it's any better, but regardless, I still find it kind of boring, without any interesting scenery or whatever to redeem it for me, and like I said, I don't like it when the ground goes past the side blast lines instead of there just being pitfalls. I don't know much about Wii Fit, but I think they could have picked a much cooler— actually, no I don't. 113. Luigi's Mansion. Here, you can fight on the 3 floors of the mansion. However, it's possible to destroy the mansion by attacking it, in which case this stage just becomes a flat one. Although, the mansion does eventually rebuild itself. I know a lot of people like this stage, but if I'm being honest, I just find it kind of boring. I mean, it can be really fun to wreck stuff, but that's the only real gimmick this stage has. They probably could have thrown in some ghosts or something to add to the action, which likely would have made this stage better. Oh well. 112. Windy Hill Zone. This stage just consists of a large curved platform with smaller platforms floating above. There's also a Ferris wheel on the right which provides some extra moving platforming, as well as a trampoline that could potentially save you from falling into the lower blast line. Sorry, that's all there is to this stage. Honestly, this one is just kind of boring, since it lacks any real substance, whether it be in the form of gimmicks, visuals, etc. Sure, the Ferris wheel's pretty fun, but it's so far off to the side that I never feel inclined to use it. 111. Green Hill Zone. This one feels a bit like an inversion of Windy Hill Zone. The platform is curved downward instead of upward, and there are no pitfalls at the side blast zones. However, this one actually has gimmicks. The ground can take damage from players' attacks, and once a section has taken enough damage, it'll crumble away, thus opening up the lower blast line. Also, checkpoint lampposts can appear, and when you hit one, it'll spin around and can cause good knockback to opponents it hits. But even so, this stage is quite small and cramped, so not for me. Geez, Sonic, your stages aren't very good. 110. Venom. I'll start with the good things. This stage has a good amount of open space, but it's otherwise pretty small, and the layout is just kind of weird. The 4 wings aren't a problem, but the vertical stabilizer makes maneuvering feel a bit awkward. It is cool how launched players can rebound off it, but since being able to move around smoothly and easily is important when playing Smash, it's more of a hindrance for the stage than an aid. If the VS weren't there, I might like this stage more. But can aircraft have dreams? 109. Palutena's Temple. And here we have another big stage. However, for this one, big is an understatement. This one is gigantic, with several different areas with different gimmicks and whatnot. I'll be honest, a part of me likes this stage since there are so many areas that you could run to and explore. However, in terms of fighting, even from a for fun perspective, it's so big that faster characters could just run away from their opponents, making it ultimately impractical. Unless, for whatever godforsaken reason, you're playing tag instead of Smash. So, at least in this regard, I dislike it more than I like it. 108. The Great Cave Offensive. Yet another humongous stage. However, this one's a bit better than Palutena's Temple, since there are even more areas that you can go explore. Also, instead of blast lines, there are lava and fire traps everywhere, and if you touch one with a certain amount of damage, you'll be KO'd. However, the outrageously big size kind of keeps me away from it. Honestly, astronomical stages like this are only really fun for 8-player Smash, but how often is it that you have 7 other people to play with? I'm guessing not very, so I can't put these stages any higher. 107. New Pork City. Yet another really big stage with a lot of platforms. However, this one's not quite as big as Palutena's Temple or Great Cave Offensive, so it's more practical and therefore a bit better. But in terms of gimmicks, all it really has of note is an ultimate Chimera that can spawn and despawn infinitely during a match, and if you get too close, it'll OHKO you. However, it moves around slowly, and given the stage's big size, avoiding it isn't exactly difficult. So this stage isn't wretched, but nothing stellar either. 106. Hannonbow. This stage is a bit similar to Morai Towers, in that it's quite tall, with several diagonal leaf platforms. However, this one is significantly better, since said leaves will change their angles, and colors, when hit by the player's attacks. However, the layout is, yes, awkward, and it puts more priority on surviving than attacking. Basically, if any stage does this, it's bound to be lower on my list. I know a lot of people hate this stage, but even with the problems I have with it, I don't think it's that bad. 105. Final Destination. Before you start hating on me for putting FD this low, remember, I'm ranking all stages from a for fun perspective. If I were doing it from a for glory perspective, trust me, it'd be a lot higher, since FD, or any stage in Omega form, is my go-to for any serious Smash Bros match. But for less serious matches, FD, just being one flat platform, is better than any stage with annoying gimmicks, bad sizes, or anything else like that, but worse than any stage with actually good gimmicks, so just consider FD the cutoff point. 104. Smashville. And so begins our marathon of Battlefield-esque stages. To kick it off, we have one that's literally just Battlefield minus the smaller platforms floating above. Said platforms are replaced by a single platform that continually pans across the air. That's it, that's the only difference, not counting aesthetic differences. I guess the moving platform is a pretty nice touch, but overall, this stage just feels relatively boring, and definitely not as fun as the real Battlefield. 103. Yoshi's Island. This one, in terms of layout, is identical to Smashville, only the floating platform above doesn't move. In addition to that, there are also tiny platforms that can appear on the lower corners of the stage, which could potentially save you from falling into the lower blast line. With this new gimmick, this stage is a bit better than Smashville, but I still think it's pretty boring overall. However, I will say I really like the theme and scenery, and I also like how the season can change. That was a very nice aesthetic touch. 102. Small Battlefield. As should be obvious from the name, this is Battlefield, but smaller, plus with one of the floating platforms above missing. Sorry, that's it. Although there are no gimmicks, I like all the open space, plus 2 small platforms is a bit more interesting than one bigger one, even if that bigger one moves around. But that's all this stage really has. Pretty much just because of the one missing platform, I don't like the small version of Battlefield as much as the regular one, so let's see which kind of clones do better. 101, Coliseum. This stage is similar to Wii Fit Studio, a long, flat ground that extends past both side blast lines. However, what makes this one better is that the floating platforms above come and go, and when they show up, they can have different placements and sizes. Stages that drastically change their layout mid-battle are pretty much always good in my eyes, but since that's all this one has, with no other gimmicks or anything else of note, I find this stage relatively boring, and again, I don't like it when the edges have no pitfalls. 100, Bridge of Eldin, another one like Wii Fit Studio, a long flat platform that goes past the side blast lines, but this time without any other platforms. Instead, a bomb will eventually be dropped that will destroy the middle of the platform, thus creating a pit that players can fall down, although it does eventually get rebuilt and the cycle repeats. Although I, once again, don't like it when the edges of a stage extend past the side blast lines, I do like this one's gimmick of a recurring pitfall, but apart from that, it doesn't have much, so I'm not crazy about it. 99, Great Bay. In terms of size, and especially open space, this stage is great, no pun intended. The former is good, and there's an abundance of the latter. So why is it this low then? Because that's all it really has to offer, and to be a good Super Smash Bros. Stage, you need to have a lot more substance than that. It is pretty cool how the giant turtle can come and go, and therefore alter the stage's size mid-game, but I feel like there really should be more funner gimmicks than just that. If there were, I'm sure it would have a better spot. 98, Duck Hunt. For platforming, this stage just has a flat one on bottom, plus smaller ones with the trees, bush, and the 8-bit dog that can pop up out of the grass. However, the appeal to it is mainly from the aesthetics. There are 8-bit birds flying around in the background, which you can hit and kill, after which the dog will grab their corpses. And if you ignore them, he'll just laugh at you. Yes, I know this process contributes nothing to the actual match, it's just a fun background touch that I love. But this alone isn't enough to secure this otherwise boring stage a better spot. 97, Northern Cave. This is another stage like Smashville, only there are 2 floating platforms instead of just 1. Apart from that, there are no differences in terms of layout or gameplay. However, aesthetically speaking, this stage is cooler than both Smashville and Yoshi's Island. The scenery in the background is much cooler and constantly changes, keeping it from becoming an eyesore like a lot of other stages. But even with that, I still find this stage just a little boring, since it takes more than just nice scenery for a Smash Bros. Stage to be fun. 96, Battlefield. This stage is just like the derivatives of it that I mentioned before. One big, flat platform below, and 3 smaller ones floating above. Aside from FD, of course, this is about as basic a stage as you can get. No gimmicks, and a nice and simple layout that makes it both fun and practical. However, gimmicks are usually more what make a stage fun than layout, so I pick Battlefield more often when playing for glory, but when playing for fun, there are a lot of other stages I'd rather pick. 95, Yoshi's Story. This one, like MIIVERSE, is just Battlefield wearing a different outfit. A big platform on the bottom, with 3 smaller ones floating up above. However, this one has nicer scenery, and the Yoshi theme just draws me to it. I love Yoshi, so of course, if there's a Yoshi-themed version of something, odds are I'm gonna like it more than the original. I know the edges of the bottom platform are slightly angled, which makes it a little different, but it's such a small difference that I hardly even notice it when playing on this stage. 94, Skyworld. This one's layout is pretty similar to Battlefield, only the platforms are clouds, which, once the terrain covering them is destroyed by the fighters' attacks, can be traveled through. Having a gimmick like this makes this stage inherently a little better than Battlefield, since, again, it's similar in terms of layout. Also, the fun never stops, since the terrain will eventually come back, meaning you can destroy to your heart's content. Side note, there's also a moving platform that can appear below the stage, so there's a tad more variety too. 93, Hollow Bastion. This stage is pretty much the same as Yoshi's Island, since it consists of one big platform below and a smaller one above, and the platforming stays consistent throughout the game. It also lacks any gimmicks. However, this one has much nicer scenery in the background, so much so that it's also better than Battlefield's clones that more closely match Battlefield's layout. This might sound kind of petty, but epic scenery like this can really help make a stage more fun, even though it literally contributes nothing to the actual gameplay itself. 92, Lilac Cruise. In a nutshell, this stage is a tilting version of Battlefield. You have one big platform on the bottom and 3 smaller ones above, but the whole thing tilts to and fro all throughout the match. Also, the scenery in the background is very epic. Although there could have been more added gimmicks aside from just the tilting, I still think this stage is quite fun, since again, it has the same fun layout as Battlefield, and the tilting can make you have to plan out certain moves, recovery specifically, more carefully. 91, Dreamland. Again, this one has the same layout as Battlefield, only in the Kirby style. Also, it has a pretty fun added gimmick in the form of Wispy Woods, who can blow wind in either direction, which will push players who get caught in it back. Since the wind blowing is both a more fun and intrusive gimmick than tilting, collapsible platforms, nice aesthetics, etc., Dreamland is a little better than Battlefield, of course, plus Yoshi's Story, Skyworld, and Lilac Cruise. But we're not quite done with Battlefield clones just yet. 90, Fountain of Dreams. Once again, this one has the same layout as Battlefield, only in the Kirby style. Again. However, although this one lacks any gimmicks, the theme of this stage is very beautiful and peaceful, so much so that I feel it doesn't even need gimmicks. Well, the floating platforms can lower into the water and temporarily disappear, but I hardly consider that a gimmick. But forget that. With how graceful this stage's scenery is, I just can't help but like it, even though, in terms of layout, it's no different from Battlefield. But hey, it's my list. 89, Town and City. This one is mostly the same as Smashville, only there are more moving platforms, which can also come and go at random intervals. You might be wondering, why is it better than Battlefield? Because in terms of layout, it's almost exactly like Battlefield, only the scenery is nicer, for one, and more importantly, the platforms moving around and coming and going makes it both more fun and more interesting. And in case you're wondering, yes, that's also why it's better than Smashville. Who knew moving platforms could be so fun? 88, UMBRA Clock Tower. This one is exactly like Town and City. You're fighting on a big platform below, this time being a broken clock tower, and many smaller floating platforms will come and go throughout the fight. But in this one, the platforms can appear in many more places than in Town and City, and even disregarding that, the scenery is much cooler along with the concept. Fighting on a clock tower is quite the clever concept if I do say so myself. I don't really care for Bayonetta as a fighter, but the stage she brought with her is sure a good one. 87, Balloon Trip. This stage is kind of like Battlefield, only smaller, and there are several small platforms instead of a few of those, plus one big one at the bottom. It also has a good amount of gimmicks. A star that floats around and damages anyone it touches, a fish that can come out of the water and drag players it catches down under, aka KO them, and finally, for some reason, the side blast zones don't activate if you go into them by choice. They only do when you get launched into them. I'm not quite sure how to feel about that, but no matter what, this stage is actually quite fun. 86, Big Battlefield. Basically, I see this stage as a version of Battlefield more suited for 8 players. The big platform below is much bigger, and there are 6 smaller platforms floating above instead of just 3. In my opinion, this layout is more fun, no matter how many players there are. Sure, it's pretty big, but at least it's not astronomical like the likes of Palutena's Temple, Great Cave Offensive, Newport City, etc. Although it's honestly better when playing 8-player Smash, it's still really fun when playing with less than that, enough so to be better than regular Battlefield. 85, Congo Jungle. Sorry, yet another Battlefield-esque stage. This one has a big platform on the bottom, with 4 smaller ones floating above, 2 of which move vertically. These moving platforms add more variety, but not as much as the floating cannon that moves horizontally below the stage. You can jump into the cannon and launch yourself upwards, damaging any opponents you hit. Doing this is a literal blast, and bonus, you could potentially use it to save yourself from falling into the lower blast line. This cannon's a testament to how gimmicks can really make or break a stage. 84, Super Happy Tree. Hey, blame Sakurai for making all these Battlefield clone stages, not me. Anyway, in terms of layout, this one is, yes, just like Battlefield, only in the Yoshi theme and with much more open space on the sides. In this open space are 2 cloud platforms that you can use to fight closer to one of the side blast lines. This stage is one of the best Battlefield clones, since if you get bored or cramped in the middle, you can just jump to one of the cloud platforms. Having extra platforming options can really help improve a stage's layout, and therefore fun factor. 83, Frigate Orpheon. Or is it Orpheon? From a layout standpoint, this stage is roughly similar to Battlefield, only there aren't quite as many platforms. However, the few there are can move around, and also, at random intervals, the stage can do a complete 180, which can be really disorienting. While most find this gimmick more annoying, I actually kind of like it, because it really adds a layer of suspense and surprise to the match, since you're always fretting over when it's gonna happen next. The background scenery is also really cool. 82, Garden of Hope. This stage actually has a really good size. It's nice and big, and definitely not too big. Along with that, there are hanging platforms on the edges that, if you stand on them, they'll start to fall, plus a spot on the ground where Pikmin can build a wall around you and trap you inside, which any fighters can break by attacking it. And the piece de resistance, a peckish aristocrat can walk across the stage, causing major damage to anyone it hits. He's all like, I should kick your ass! These unique and fun gimmicks make this otherwise bland stage actually pretty fun. 81, Mute City SNES. Imagine Battlefield without the huge platform at the bottom. Basically, this stage is just several pretty small platforms, or specifically 8-bit cars, that are always moving around. Also, don't think you can just avoid them, because if you touch the actual ground, you'll get launched upwards, so these cars are the only platforming options you have. This stage feels kind of like Battlefield on steroids, since the platforms are all over the place, plus you have to be extra careful not to fall off them. And side note, this stage's concept is very epic, SNES-themed or not. 80, Distant Planet. This is a pretty small stage, with a slope on the left, and smaller platforms that wobble when they're landed on. It can sometimes rain, which will make the slope a death trap, since the water running down it will drag anyone caught in it into the lower blast line. However, there's a huge open space on the right, where which a giant bulb orb can appear. If anyone is unlucky enough to fall into its mouth, they'll get OHKO'd. Honestly, the only fun thing about this stage for me is throwing opponents into the bulb orb's mouth. There's really nothing quite like that. 79, Mario Bros. Please just hear me out. I know a lot of people hate this stage, the reasons being the small size and the 8-bit enemies that can be grabbed and thrown at opponents, which cause an insane amount of knockback. With this gimmick, this stage feels more like a mad dash to grab the enemies than to actually fight your opponents mano-a-mano. However, I actually like this. It's nice when the Smash formula gets altered every now and again. Simple fighting is a blast, don't get me wrong, but I'm the kind of guy who needs a change of pace every so often, which this stage does perfectly. Unpopular opinion, I know. 78. Wrecking Crew. This stage is similar to Mirai Towers in that it's really tall with several floors. However, said floors are flat instead of diagonal, which is a much more palatable stage layout in my opinion. Also, there are bombs everywhere, which when attacked could explode and both hurt nearby opponents and destroy the floor they're on, thus making the ones above it fall down. With this stage constantly changes layout during the match. Like I said already, I love it when stages do this. Basically, Luigi's Mansion done right. 77. Tortimer Island. This stage is relatively big, with a lot of open space. Also, instead of pitfalls on the edges, there's water in which players can swim for a while, although they risk getting eaten by sharks if they do. That's pretty much all there is to this stage. This is one of those stages that I like pretty much just because. I can't really give you a specific reason. Could just be the atmosphere, the serene background, the pure simplicity. I really don't know, and that surprises me too, considering I'm not a fan of Animal Crossing. But no matter what, good stage. 76. Yggdrasil's Altar. I probably butchered the hell out of that. Anyway, this stage is kind of like Battlefield, but with a layout that constantly changes. Several smaller floating platforms will keep appearing, then going away periodically, which I think is a pretty good concept for a stage. I also love how the background is pretty much a tour of a vast outdoor area. I'm sure it would be a lot more fun if it were an actual tour stage that dropped you off at different locations, but this stage is still good, what with the concept and nice background. Again. 75. Spiral Mountain. I'm gonna be honest, there's a bit of personal bias in this one. Let me start with the layout. It's a bit like Battlefield, with one big platform on bottom, plus a few smaller moving ones floating off to the side. However, these platforms will disappear, then the entire stage will rotate, and new platforms will come in. This gimmick in particular makes this stage a unique one, and also, I enjoyed Banjo-Kazooie, so getting to see the world from the game in HD is really nice, even if it is just background. I also like how Bottles, the Jinjos, and other characters from the game make cameos. 74. Tomodachi Life. This stage is, in terms of layout, similar to Wrecking Crew, a tall building with several floors. However, the platforming remains constant all throughout. Plus, when you're on any floor but the very top one, you can see your Miis hanging out inside the building doing different things. While Wrecking Crew is a bit more fun due to the bombs, I prefer this one because I like how your Miis can make cameos. I don't know about you, but I take pride in making good-looking Miis, so when a game lets me see a lot of them during gameplay, it makes me feel good. So Tomodachi Life has the right idea. 73. Castle Siege. With this stage, you get 3 for the price of 1. The first layout is a castle with a few platforms and not a lot of space. The second layout is a huge room with statues holding up bigger platforms, and said statues can be broken, thus removing said platforms. Better. Lastly, the third layout is a tilting platform over lava with more open space. Again, the first one's just meh, but the second and third ones are quite fun, especially the third one due to all the open space. Stages that completely change in layout mid-game are always cool to me. 72. Great Plateau Tower. The fighters start off under a huge tower, which takes up a good portion of the stage. However, said tower can be destroyed if the fighters hit it too many times, in which case a lot of space and one small floating platform will open up. The tower will come back eventually though, meaning you can destroy to your heart's content. Wait, did I already say that earlier? I'll be honest, the stage itself is pretty fun to fight on, but what makes it the most fun is destroying the tower. I don't really know why, but wrecking stuff is just a blast. 71. Jungle Japes. This stage has 3 platforms, plus a smaller fourth one, above raging waters. So raging, in fact, that if you fall into it, you'll get dragged towards the left blast line faster than you can say, "It's not melee!" You could jump out, but it's easier said than done. The water alone makes this stage much more fun than others with similar layouts, but without similarly fun gimmicks. I know the rapids are less dangerous than a pit with the lower blast line inside, but how many stages have pits, and how many have rapids like this one? I rest my case. 70. Reset Bomb Forest. This is another multiple in one stage. It starts out in the ruins of a castle, which has a pretty fun layout. However, after a minute, Viridi will drop a massive reset bomb, which will destroy the castle remains and place the fighters in a dreary forest, and the stage will continue to switch between these two layouts for the whole battle. This second layout is much more fun, and also making it more fun is the Lurch Thorn that'll fly above the lower blast line, which can launch players who touch it very far up. And again, I love stages that drastically change their layout mid-smash. 69. Flat Zone. Let me start with the bad. This stage is pretty small, without a lot of open space. But onto the good, the layout is ever-changing, what with the platforms, which can move around all over the place. There are also oil slicks, as well as tools that can fall down and hit players, causing decent damage. These gimmicks make this stage quite fun, despite the fact that I typically don't care for stages this small. I also love all the Game & Watch visuals and aesthetics. If it wasn't for the small size, this one would be much higher. 68. Saffron City. This one takes place atop a lot of tall buildings with a couple of moving platforms thrown in as well. Also, there's a door on the roof of the Sylph Company building, out of which different Pokemon can appear and, in different ways, cause damage to players caught in their line of fire. While I find this gimmick, as well as the good amount of open space, enjoyable, this stage kind of gets a little boring after a while. There's not really much substance or enough going on to keep it interesting, but it's not bad at all. It's good. 67. Peach's Castle. This stage is strange. Despite being named Peach's Castle, this is clearly not Peach's Castle. It's just a random platform up in the sky with a smaller platform that slowly moves side to side, a couple of triangle platforms floating up above that I guess can alter a launched player's flight path, and a moving bumper, for some reason. But despite how weird this stage's layout is, I actually don't dislike it. In fact, I think it's pretty fun. I just love throwing opponents into the bumper in triangles. Man, what a riot. 66. Prism Tower, a tour stage. This one takes you throughout Lumio City from Pokemon X and Y, with the big platform dropping you off at several different other layouts throughout the fight. However, most of said layouts are pretty basic and simplistic, being similar to Battlefield, or in the first layout's case, FD, without the drops on the sides. But what makes this one stand out is the background and visuals. The scenery that Lumio City has to offer is really breathtaking, as well as the day and night cycle. I also love how various Pokemon can be seen flying around. 65. Minecraft World. One unique thing about this stage is that the layout changes each time you play on it. How neat is that? There's a plains level, a birch forest, a savanna, a taiga, a snowy tundra, and a stone shore, all of which are pretty fun in their own rights. While none of these layouts seem to have any real obstacles, the simple fact that it can change each time you go in is enough to make that negligible. It was also the perfect stage to accompany Steve on his Smash debut, which, even though I'm not a fan of Minecraft, is really something. 64. Super Mario Maker! Just like Minecraft World, this stage's layout changes every time you enter, but in this case, the changes are more dynamic, since some can have pipes, treadmills, brick blocks, donut blocks, ice blocks, mystery blocks that can yield items, and more. Stages that make minor changes to their layout mid-smash are one thing, but ones whose entire layouts change each time you play a new game, that's just awesome, and makes the stage feel almost brand new every time. Even though I could never really get into any of the Mario Maker games, this stage definitely does them justice. 63. Green Greens. First things first, this stage is quite small, plus there are a lot of bombs that can respawn after exploding, which, if they blow up near you, can launch you really far and even take one of your lives early, given how close the blast lines are. Also, like in Dreamland, Wispy Woods can blow air, which can disrupt players. But although these gimmicks annoy a good amount of people, I actually kind of like them when just playing casual Smash and not serious Smash, because I find it really fun to use projectile attacks to blow the bombs up and launch my opponents to Timbuktu. 62. Figure 8 Circuit. Say what you want about Figure 8 Circuit from Mario Kart DS, but it can't be denied that this Smash Bros. Stage version of it is pretty fun. It is quite small, but a bunch of shy guys driving carts will keep driving in the player's path from two different directions, and getting hit by them causes a good amount of knockback, so may I recommend staying the hell away. Having to both fight my opponents while at the same time protecting my own ass from the stage is quite a fun way to play Smash. I also like how you can actually attack the shy guys. 61. Jungle Hijinks. This stage is unique in that it has two separate parts, one in the foreground and the other in the background, which players can switch between freely using cannons. Also, when players jump in said cannons and get launched, they'll damage any opponents they hit, but here's the catch. Eventually, either the foreground or the background part of the stage will disappear, thus forcing you to switch to the other one if you aren't already there. It's too bad this stage didn't make it into Ultimate, since I find it quite fun and, again, unique. 60. Spear Pillar. This stage has two halves. The top half is basically small Battlefield, and the bottom half is basically FD with a ceiling. However, the real appeal to this stage are the legendary Pokemon that can appear. Dialga and Palkia can tilt the screen, temporarily destroy parts of the stage, fire laser beams, slow time down, alter gravity, mirror the screen, and directly attack the players. Cresselia can also appear, and she can attack the players by throwing energy crescents. Although a few of these gimmicks can be a nuisance, I still find a lot of them very fun and on toe keeping. 59. Cloud Sea of Alrest. Or is it Alrest? This one takes place on a stone dragon ship thing flying across a sea of clouds. The stone dragon can move its head, which means this stage's platforming can change mid-battle, which you know how much I like. I also like all the clouds and other sky scenery, and also how the clouds cover the lower blast line. Just a nice little touch that adds to this stage's charm. Sorry, that's it. Not every stage is good for a big number of reasons, but you know what is good for a big number of reasons? Time-killing epilogues. 58. Pilot Wings. This stage takes place on airplanes that tilt around to and fro and fly across the skies of Woohoo Island. Sorry, that's all for this stage's gameplay. Yeah, it may be very simple, but I actually find all the tilting quite amusing, plus I love all the Makawoohoo scenery, along with how the first airplane will eventually drop the players off onto a second plane, which will then drop them back onto the first one, and so on and so forth. It would be nice if it had some actual gimmicks, but not every stage necessarily needs them to be fun. 57. Arena Ferox. This is another stage that repeatedly changes layout mid-Smash. I'm not going to remind you how much I love seeing that in Smash Bros. Stages. While I think all the different layouts are quite fun, my favorite has to be the one with the Ferris wheel, since fighting on moving platforms offers a whole new style of gameplay, which I really enjoy. Sorry I don't have much to say for this one. Some stages are just good for one simple reason. There's nothing else I can say for this stage. It's just fun, short, sweet, and to the point. 56. Pokemon Stadium. This one is similar to Arena Ferox in that it keeps changing layout throughout the battle, each of which are themed around Pokemon types. There's one for rock, one for water, one for grass, and one for fire, and each has its own unique platform placement. Although this one seems to lack any moving platforms, not counting the windmill in the water section, I still prefer this stage overall to Arena Ferox because the layout seems to change more drastically, plus the aesthetics are cooler. And not that it really matters, but I like Pokemon much more than Fire Emblem. Sorry, not sorry. 55. WILY Castle. This stage is pretty much just FD, but with smaller floating platforms that will intermittently come and go over the main platform and on the sides of it over the lower blast line. Also, the Yellow Devil can appear and attack the players by shooting eye lasers, as well as, pulverizing himself, for lack of a better word, and his little bits can launch pretty far. The players can also attack him, and once he's taken a certain amount of damage, he'll explode and launch nearby players, except the one who blew him up, very far, just like Metal Face from Gower Plain. This stage, although to a lesser extent, changes layout, and YD is quite a fun gimmick. 54. Spring Stadium. Yet another battlefield-like stage. However, instead of 3 small platforms floating above a bigger one, there's only one small platform which doubles as a trampoline. There are also trampolines on each edge of the ground, plus floating ones that can continually dis and reappear, all of which can be jumped from to get some serious air. However, the best part is the ceiling, which launched fighters can ricochet off of, possibly right into the lower blast line. While difficult to pull off, when it does happen, it's just so amusing. Min Min, an awesome fighter, brought an awesome stage along with her. 53. Planet Zebes. This stage is like a lopsided version of Battlefield. There's one big platform on bottom and some smaller ones floating above. Also, the stage will continually lower towards flaming acid, which, if players touch, will launch them quite high upwards. However, that's what the smaller floating platforms are for. They can be used to avoid the acid. Again, having to deal with both fighting opponents and avoiding the stage hazards can make Smash Bros. Really fun. It does kind of suck that this stage has never come back, but in this case, it's not that big of a deal because... 52. Brinstar. This one is basically the exact same as Planet Zebes, just with a slightly different layout. However, the objective remains the same. Use the smaller floating platforms to avoid the flaming acid once the stage gets submerged in it. However, as a little bonus, the small platform's angles can be altered if the players hit the, globs of goop, connecting them to the main platform. Along with that, this one is slightly better than Planet Zebes because it's newer and can be played in a modern setting in Ultimate. Yeah, that's it. 51. Living Room. This big stage based off Nintendogs takes place in a huge living room, hence the name, with a dog in the background. Over time, dog toys will keep appearing above the players and dropping down on them. If one hits them, they'll suffer a good amount of damage and knockback. I find the franticness of having to dodge these while fighting is very fun and on toe-keeping, and side note, as a kid, I loved Nintendogs and was therefore very happy when I first saw this stage. I also like how the toys can be used as platforms after they hit the ground. 50. UNOVA Pokemon League. This one is kind of similar to Spear Pillar, only the layout is different, lacking the bottom half and replacing it with 2 sets of stairs on either side. Also, Reshiram and Zekrom can appear and attack with fire and electricity respectively, which can severely damage not only the players but also the stage for a short time. Since Reshiram and Zekrom have much less intrusive effects on the stage than Dialga and Palkia do on Spear Pillar, I find this stage more tolerable and therefore more fun. Don't get me wrong, I do like Spear Pillar, but I think UPL is quite better. 49. Gerudo Valley. This stage is similar to UPL, not only in terms of layouts, but also the gimmicks. Once the players break the bridge in the center, Kome and Kotake will appear, and one of them will cast a spell on one half of the stage, either ice or fire, which can cause a good amount of damage to players it hits, just like in UPL, how half the stage can get infused with electricity or fire. However, this one is slightly better because it's bigger, and I like how the bridge in the middle can be destroyed and result in a bottomless pit. Quite fun indeed. 48. Find Me. This small stage has a pretty basic layout with a few bottomless pits. However, what puts it this high is the Dark Lord. Once he appears, he can give certain players upgrades or downgrades, temporarily buffing or nerfing certain stats respectively. In my opinion, this is a very unique and welcome gimmick, and can spice gameplay up quite a bit. I also like how one of your Miis can appear in the cage, and if the players hit it, it'll start rocking back and forth and can damage players it hits. Again, the stage's layout is nothing special, but the Dark Lord is awesome. 47. Sector Z. This stage takes place on the Great Fox, which is very big, and there's a lot of open space above it. The layout is pretty simple, although you can stand on the gun turrets, but unless you're suicidal, don't do that. And the exhaust pipes. While there's not a whole lot going on this stage, I tend to like bigger stages over smaller ones, and the concept of fighting on a flying mothership through outer space is insanely cool. Yes, I know this one never made a return, but in this case, it doesn't matter, because there's another similar stage that's even better, but we'll get to it. 46. Pac-Maze. Here, the players are fighting both each other and the ghosts from the Pac-Man series. Players who get hit by them will take damage, but they can also hit them if they get the bonus fruit, which will also buff their stats and or make them invincible. This gimmick, and I guess being able to collect power pellets too, make this stage quite fun. I really wish it had come back in Ultimate, especially since Sonic has 2 stages. Why can't other third-party fighters have more than one stage too, Sakurai? Stop with this favoritism! 45. Golden Plains. Starting with the bad, this stage is pretty small, but that's the only bad thing. Say what you will about New Super Mario Bros. 2, but this stage is a great encapsulation of what the game is all about, collecting coins. Once a player gets 100, he or she will turn into pure gold, which will temporarily but greatly increase both their attack and defense powers. Seriously, the boost is so crazy that it's actually worth foregoing with fighting to collect coins instead. This offers an interesting twist on gameplay, which is very appealing to me. 44. Gamer. This one takes place in a child's bedroom, with books held up by building blocks serving as platforms. Again, However, what makes it good enough to rank this high is the fact that every so often, the mom will open the door and look inside, at which point the players must get out of her line of sight, for if they don't, they'll suffer major damage and knockback. So you have to both fight your opponents, as well as stay alert for the mother and run to a spot where she won't see you. Again, this offers an interesting gameplay twist, and I always love those. 43. Pokemon Stadium 2. This one is like Pokemon Stadium 1, but since the different stage layouts have actual gimmicks this time, I think it's significantly better. There's a layout for Electric, which summons treadmills, Flying, which lessens gravity, Ice, which adds, surprise surprise, ice physics to the match, and Ground, which, well, doesn't really have any gimmicks. Again, I always love stages that change their layout mid-game, but when said layouts also come with new gimmicks, it just makes me love them so much more. Gotta have gimmicks. 42. Princess Peach's Castle. Now this is Peach's Castle. The one from 64 is, like I established earlier, just so weird, but this one is where it's at. Not only is it an actual castle this time, but it's also not terribly small, and there are item blocks which can spawn items, switches that can spawn platforms, and bonsai bills that can crash into the castle and blow up, causing good damage and knockback to any nearby fighters. While these gimmicks are fun, I think I like this stage mostly for the concept of fighting atop Peach's Castle instead of inside it or in the courtyard or something. That's just really cool. 41. Hyrule Castle. This one's another castle, only bigger with a lot more open space. There are also more small platforms, plus a moving tornado that'll keep disc and reappearing, which, if players get caught in it, will launch them far upward. Sorry, that's it. Again, I like bigger stages, and I just love grabbing opponents, throwing them into the tornado, and watching them fly sky high. I feel there could be more gimmicks, don't ask me for examples, and if there were, this stage would certainly be better, but as it stands, it's great. 40. Corneria. This one is just like Sector Z, although not quite as big. However, where it beats Sector Z is that other ships can fly by and shoot lasers, which players should be careful to avoid unless they want to take damage. It's also pretty cool how the players can use said ships as platforms. While it does suck that this stage doesn't have the big size or open space that Sector Z has, I still find it a fine replacement, since the extra gimmicks make it significantly more fun. Too bad we can't have the best of both worlds, but no matter, Corneria rocks. 39. Halberd. Here, you're on a long platform that'll take you around Meta Knight's giant flying ship. Said platform is just meh, but what's really cool is once you get on the actual halberd. On top of fighting your opponents, you'll also have to deal with the combo cannon's laser beam, a cannon that shoots cannonballs, and the huge mechanical arm. But the long platform will eventually pick you back up and give you a break from all these weapons. I won't lie, this stage could have been even better if it had more than just one stop like other tour stages, but even as it is, it's awesome. 38. Mishima Dojo. This stage can be summed up with one sentence.
I will put you through that wall!
The side and upper blast lines are all blocked off by walls and a ceiling, respectively, which, if a player is launched into with enough force, will break. This is a really fun gimmick. Although the layout is average, the wall gimmick is just way too fun for me to put this stage any lower. Yes, I know other stages have breakable terrain, but no other stages have it all over the perimeter, so here, it's easier than ever to take advantage of. 37. King of Fighters Stadium. This is another
I will put you through that wall!
Stage, but here, the walls are invisible, and there's no ceiling. Also, unlike in Mishima Dojo, the walls can't be partially broken, only completely, which I think is a bit better. But apart from that, it's pretty much the exact same as Mishima Dojo, at least in terms of layout. However, from an aesthetic standpoint, the background and visuals are much nicer. So with those, and the slightly better walls, this stage is just a smidge better than Mishima Dojo. 36. Dreamland GB. Here, the players are pretty much playing through a classic Kirby level while fighting. The stage both transforms and scrolls, and takes place inside of a Game Boy, with everything in the background being monochrome. There aren't any real obstacles per se, but a stage like this doesn't necessarily need obstacles to be fun. All the transforming and scrolling make this one a blast, even though it becomes kind of an eyesore the more you play on it. But bad aesthetics aside, this one is, again, a blast to play on. A scrolling stage done right. 35. Pac-Land. Similar to Dreamland GB, this one has the players on a retro-themed stage that scrolls. However, unlike Dreamland GB, this one scrolls both left and right, and there are actual obstacles this time, like fire hydrants, tree stumps, geysers, and unstable platforming. Also, it doesn't become an eyesore. Well, at least not as fast, since it's much more detailed and colorful, which is much more pleasant to look at than just plain green. It's also a bit more fun, since the scrolling is perpetual instead of intermittent. For those reasons, it barely scrapes past Dreamland GB. 34. Magicant. This stage contains 4 platforms, 3 small and 1 really small, floating apart from each other. Yeah, the stage is overall pretty small without that much open space, but what puts it this high is the flying man that can come out of the little house. Once he shows up, he'll become a teammate to the first player who attacks him, thus temporarily turning the fight into a race to get an ally first. I love it when stage gimmicks change the game like this. And bonus, the scenery is really nice. I'm no fan of pink, don't get me wrong, but still, nice view. 33. Pyrosphere. This stage is quite big, with a few small floating platforms. You know how much I like big stages, right? However, what really makes this stage shine is Ridley. He'll appear out of nowhere and start attacking the players, but like with the flying man from Magicant, the first player who attacks him enough will become immune to his attacks, so it's another temporarily gameplay-changing stage. But since Ridley is more dangerous than the flying man, this stage is an iota better than Magicant. I wonder why this stage didn't make the cut into Ultimate. Is it because Ridley is a playable character now? Nah, can't be. Must be something else. 32. Mementos. At face value, this stage is, in terms of layout, like Battlefield. However, the main gimmick is the temporary walls, which will appear and stay for a while, and these walls can cover the side and upper blast lines, thus causing fighters launched into them to rebound off them. The top wall is especially fun in this regard. You can hit your opponents upward, and unless they're good at teching, they can ricochet right into the lower blast line, just like in Spring Stadium. Besides the cool visuals, this gimmick alone makes this stage awesome. 31. Midgar. The layout of this stage is exactly like Battlefield, a big platform on bottom with 3 smaller ones floating above. However, a glowing orb of light will eventually appear, and once a player touches it, a huge creature will show up and wreak havoc on the stage, which the player who summoned him will be immune to. Said havoc can include flooding, electricity, fire, a huge laser, or the stage temporarily being split in half. These can all, in their own ways, be severe hindrances to players, so there's a huge emphasis on avoiding them, which I find very fun. 30. Mushroomy Kingdom. This one takes place in a desolate version of World 1 Level 1 from Super Mario Bros. The obstacles include brick blocks that can be broken, mystery boxes that may contain items, pipes that can get in the player's way, and bottomless pits. The stage also scrolls, but not too fast, thankfully. I know a lot of people don't like this stage very much, but I actually quite enjoy it. When playing for fun, of course. I just like the concept of having to keep up with the stage while fighting. However, I only like the 1-1 version. The World 1 Level 2 version sucks ass, and no one can deny that. 29. Fourside. I like to think of this stage as Saffron City version 2.0. It takes place atop a lot of tall buildings with a couple moving platforms thrown in as well, in the form of a platform being held up by a crane and the UFO. The layout of these buildings leaves much more open space, plus the UFO is really fun to fight on. I just love grabbing enemies while I'm on it and up-throwing them into the upper blast line. I also really like the concept of fighting in a city atop buildings at night. All that is why this stage beats Saffron City. 28. KALOS Pokemon League. Here's another transformation stage. This time, there are 4 layouts based on the 4 types of the Elite Four from Pokemon X and Y. Water, Steel, Fire, and Dragon. The Water one can contain either a water slide or a whirlpool. The Steel one has 2 swords that act as walls, plus a pit of liquid metal that will turn any player who touches it metal. The Fire one has 2 pillars of, well, fire, and the Dragon one contains dragon pulses that will appear at random intervals, all of which can be dangerous to players in their own ways. All these gimmicks are very fun if you ask me. 27. Spirit Train. This one takes place on a moving train. What an amazing concept right off the bat. I will say that the train is kind of small, but I haven't gotten to the gimmicks yet. Certain types of cargo can be added to the train, some of which temporarily provide more platforming, and others that are more harmful, such as blowing up. Also, there's no lower blast line, obviously, and I just love hitting enemies onto the ground and watching them either get rammed by the train or hurtled right into the right blast zone. There's nothing like it, I swear. 26. Mario Circuit. Based on Mario Circuit from Mario Kart 8, this stage is Figure 8 Circuit on steroids. Don't get me wrong, Figure 8 Circuit is good. In Smash Bros, not in Mario Kart, just to be clear, but this one is great. It's a tour stage for one, and each of the stops contains driving Shy Guys, which players must watch out for, plus the racetrack can cover parts of the blast zones, which is a really clever touch. I'll admit, it probably would have been better if Sakurai had chosen a cooler track from Mario Kart 8 to make into a stage, like maybe Sunshine Airport, but regardless, this one came out great. 25. Pirate Ship. Fighting on a pirate ship? Man, what an awesome concept! Also, this stage is loaded with gimmicks. A catapult that can launch really far, cannonballs that are shot from the background and do a crap ton of damage, a tornado that lessens gravity, and the rocky island that the ship will eventually crash into, giving the fighters more space. And I guess the little boat that can appear behind the ship. All these gimmicks make this stage very on toe-keeping, and again, I just love the concept of fighting on a pirate ship. Too bad there are no actual pirates to be seen. 24. Norfair. For layout, this stage has 5 small platforms with a decent amount of open space. Meh. However, what puts it this high are, yes, the gimmicks. Walls of lava can show up on either side of the screen, spouts of lava can shoot towards the stage from the background, and best of all, the huge tidal wave of lava, which fighters can avert by hiding in a pod. However, there's only one pod, and it's quite small, meaning fighters have to, well, fight for it, and the losers better have high heat tolerance. All these lava gimmicks make this stage really cool, totally unironically. 23. Summit. This one takes place on a mountaintop that will eventually break off and slide down the mountain, ending up flowing in water. This stage undergoes a lot of changes. The elevation changes when it's sliding down the mountain, the gravity can become lighter, and it turns into a moving stage once it breaks off. Also, during the water section, if a fighter stays in the water too long, a huge fish might come and eat them. I just like how much this stage changes, and I also really like the concept of fighting on an iceberg that flows across water, as well as while sliding down a mountain. 22. Temple, the stage that everyone loves. For one, it's really big, but not so enormous that it's not fun, like the likes of Palutena's Temple, Great Cave Offensive, and New Pork City. In fact, it's hella fun. It's split into 4 sections, with most of the fighting going on in the top 2, and sometimes in the bottom left, with the bottom right pretty much being non-existent, given how small that little platform is. In other words, the layout is just really fun. Temple just goes to show that you don't always need gimmicks to be a great stage. 21. Pokefloats. Let me start by saying this stage lacks any real platforming. It all takes place on huge Pokemon floats that float across the air at varying speeds. Because of this, you have to be careful to watch out for new floats and jump to them before the one you're on leaves the screen. This one gimmick is really epic and adds a whole new layer of suspense and platforming to the match. And again, I love it when stages make drastic gameplay changes like this. I can kinda see why this stage has never come back, but it still would have been nice to see it return in Ultimate. Maybe one day. 20. WILY World. This stage just contains ground, plus a bunch of floating platforms up above. However, the ground will eventually disappear, at which point fighters must be very careful not to fall below all the floating platforms. This makes this stage very on toe-keeping, as well as unique, since I can't think of any other stage that does this. Correct me in the comments if I'm missing something. Also, the ground will eventually return, and the aesthetics will change, which is a small but nice touch. Again, I don't see why this awesome stage didn't make it into Ultimate. Pay your damn taxes, Yoshi! 19. Flat Zone 2. Like Flat Zone 1, this stage is ever-changing. The layout can change, and with each comes new gimmicks, all of which are dangerous in different ways. There's the jail, where the police guards can hit you with chairs, the gas station, where just touching a pedestrian can damage and even KO you, and the kitchen, where the chef's food can launch you surprisingly far. Or should I say, lunch you surprisingly far. All these gimmicks make this a very fun stage to fight on, and much better than Flat Zone 1, given how much more it can change and how much more dangerous said changes can be. 18. Flat Zone X. This one is literally a combination of Flat Zones 1 and 2. It contains all the layouts from both, along with all their gimmicks as well. I love how Sakurai combined the 2 stages into one for Smash 4 and Ultimate, which is why I'm not bothered that 1 and 2 were never brought back. Sorry, I can't say anything else. I could explain the gimmicks again, but then I'd just be repeating myself, and who wants to hear that? I know I wouldn't, but you know what I would like to hear? A time-killing epilogue. Come on, give it to me, let me hear it. 17. Garrick Mock Monastery. This one is quite the tour stage. It takes you to a lot of different stops, each having different stage layouts. A big room, a bridge, one with breakable sheds, and my personal favorite, one with hanging chandeliers that can be attacked and will launch any players they fall on. Like I've said oodles of times, it's awesome when stages change their layouts mid-smash! And this one changes a lot, so of course I'm gonna love it. I also really like the scenery. It's similar to Yggdrasil's Altar, but better since, like I implied, the layout changes more drastically here. 16. Mushroom Kingdom U. This is definitely the best Mushroom Kingdom stage. The main layout is pretty big, with a lot of open space, which is good right out of the gate, but Kamek will show up and randomly transform the stage and change its layout in the process. He'll also bring along new hazards, such as falling icicles, moving platforms, a tilting platform, and best of all, Nabbit, who can stuff fighters in his bag and jump off the screen, thus KOing them. All these layout changes plus the fun hazards keep you on your toes your whole time fighting on this stage. 15. Paper Mario. This is another stage that keeps changing its layout, only this time the changes are constant, so you therefore know what to expect. The first layout is based on Heather Thither Hill from Paper Mario Sticker Star, which only has the wind gimmick. However, the second one is based on the SS Flavion from Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, which is a much more amusing layout given the bigger size and amount of open space. And finally, the third one is based on Bowser's Sky Castle from Sticker Star, which also has a fun layout. Even though the Heather Thither Hill section is just meh, the other two are so fun that this stage is among the best. It might have been better had they used areas from other Paper Mario games. Like seriously, why 2 from Sticker Star and none from 64 or Super? But even so, amazing stage. 14. Skyloft. Here we have yet another tour stage. This time you're basically on a moving version of Battlefield, which will drop you off at several different stops, each with a different layout. There's a bridge, a bell tower, a statue base, and more. Each of these layouts is fun in its own way, although some more than others. However, just how fun they all are makes me love this stage a lot, and given how much I like tour stages to begin with, that's not surprising. I also like how the moving platform changes layout each time it picks you up for a new stop. Definitely a tour stage done right. 13. Mute City. Sorry, tour stage again. Like Skyloft, this one takes you to many different areas that have different layouts, all of which I find very fun, although not quite as much as the ones from Skyloft. However, what puts this stage above Skyloft are the stage hazards. Well, hazard. The cars that zoom by, and if they hit you, will cause major damage and knockback. To avoid them, you have to use the floating platforms. Having to both fight opponents and dodge the cars at the same time is really fun. Although it would have been nice if this stage came back in Ultimate, it doesn't really bother me that it didn't because of... 12. Port Town Aero Dive. This one is, in my opinion, a better version of Mute City. It's virtually the same track in that a moving platform will drop you off at several different locations with different stage layouts, with the hazard you have to avoid being all the cars that can cause some serious damage. However, the reason I put this one above Mute City is because the cars in this version do even more damage than the ones in Mute City, plus I find them harder to avoid, and less importantly, the scenery and atmosphere are much cooler and nicer. I guess we don't really need to have both this one and Mute City in Ultimate after all. 11. Woohoo Island. Tour stage yet again. This time, the moving platform drops you off at different areas on, hence the name, Woohoo Island. The town square, the archery bridge, a moving boat, the frisbee dog beach, the swordplay arena, the top of the volcano, and more. Not only are all of these quite fun in their own ways, but I also love Wii Sports Resort and Woohoo Island, so of course I'm gonna love a stage based off it. I'll admit, I might like it more if there were actual stage hazards, but not every stage needs them to be epic, and this one is definitely no exception. 10. New Donk City Hall. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Another tour stage! This time, the moving platform takes you up the new Donk City Hall building from Super Mario Odyssey and brings you back down to the bottom after the top section is finished. Although this one doesn't have quite as many stops as the other tour stages I've gone over already, the ones here are still really fun, plus I love Mario Odyssey, and New Donk City is probably my favorite world from it. I also love how the Odyssey can be seen flying around, as well as how Pauline's band can be seen in the background depending on the music. 9. 3D Land. I think of this stage as a nearly perfect version of Mushroomy Kingdom. It scrolls and takes you across a level inspired by Super Mario 3D Land. It has several factors that make it better than Mushroomy Kingdom. Elevation changes, pipes, donut blocks, flip panels, rotating platforms, and more, and eventually it turns into a stage that scrolls on the Z-axis, which I think is a nice touch, and really brings the 3D concepts to life. In addition to fighting, you're also going on a journey with this stage, and I really admire such an interesting concept. 8. Orbital Gate Assault. This stage can be summed up like this: Sector Z and Corneria on steroids. It starts off on the Great Fox, but the layout continues to drastically change, having you fighting on missile heads that will explode, thus forcing you to get away from them unless you like being set on fire. There are also smaller R-Wings that are harder to keep your footing on, and to top all that off, R-Wings in the background will keep shooting lasers at you all the while. This stage is extremely chaotic, and it puts more priority on surviving than actually fighting, which I know I said I don't typically like, but this stage pulls it off perfectly. Also, fun fact, it took them a whole year to make this stage. Sucks that it didn't come back in Ultimate. 7. Big Blue. Think of Orbital Gate Assault watered down. This one takes place on several moving cars that'll continue to show up and go away, thus forcing you to find a new one to get on unless you want to hit the road and get dragged into the left blast line or a car in the way. While this stage isn't quite as hectic as OGA, I like how the platforming is much more volatile and inconsistent, so I slightly prefer this one. Also, I just love spiking opponents into the road. There's nothing I get more of a kick out of than that. I was very glad to see this stage come back in Ultimate after it was cut in Smash 4. 6. Rainbow Road. Back to the tour stages. This one takes you through Rainbow Road from Mario Kart 7. Most people consider this to be one of the best Mario Kart tracks ever made, and I definitely agree with that, hence why I was very happy when I first saw this stage. All the layouts are very fun, and this time there are actual stage hazards, being the driving Shy Guys from Figure 8 Circuit. Also, I love the Mario Kart series, especially Mario Kart 7, so of course I'm gonna love this stage. I'm really upset that it didn't come back in Ultimate. It really should've. What the f***, Sakurai? 5. Delfino Plaza. Last tour stage, I promise. This time around, the moving platform takes you to different stops across Isle Delfino from Super Mario Sunshine, some examples being the beach, the town, and the top of the Shine Tower, although that one seems to be very rare. Guess what I'm gonna say? These layouts are all really fun, and there are so many of them, so unlike a lot of other tour stages, this one doesn't get boring or old, at least not as fast. Also, I love Mario Sunshine, so... This is easily my favorite tour stage in all of Smash Bros. 4. WarioWare Inc. The regular layout for this stage is basically battlefields with the floating platforms rearranged. Meh. However, over time, the layout will change to one of many micro games inspired by the WarioWare series, chiseling a rock to create a statue, avoiding rain, taunting at the right time, not moving, dodging cars, falling arrows, a huge foot, a hammer, and more. If you win the micro games challenge, you'll get a reward, which could be healing a little, or temporarily turning giant, metal, or invincible. I really like the concept of earning a reward for completing a small challenge, and on top of that, a lot of the micro games are really fun and on toe keeping. 3. PictoChat. Remember that old app on the DS where you could connect with someone via wireless and exchange messages and drawings? Well, in Brawl, Sakurai decided to make it into a stage, and boy is it a blast! Both the platforming and hazards differ greatly, which is due to the fact that they're both made up by the many different drawings that pop up intermittently. We're talking a house, a whale, giant eyes, a carousel, a bunch of little lines, a bridge, fire, a piranha plant, arrows, and more. The possibilities are endless. Well, not literally. Like I've said at least once already, I'm pretty sure, I love it when stages drastically change their layout mid-game, and PictoChat defines that concept to a T. 2. PictoChat 2. This one is basically the exact same thing as the stage we just looked at, only with new gimmicks. A lot of new gimmicks, which means there are even more possibilities this time, and so it's a little better than PictoChat 1. This time, we've got pipes, dolphins, elevators, escalators, clouds, a sunset horizon, cars, a Donkey Kong stage, and many more. I know this stage's very existence kind of renders PictoChat 1 redundant, but I still wish that one had come back in Ultimate, or at the very least, all the gimmicks from it were put in this stage. That would have made this stage so much better, but no matter, PictoChat 2 gets number 2, easily. 1. Rainbow Cruise. Please don't unsubscribe! I feel like not many people care much for this stage, but personally I think it's amazing, at least from a for fun perspective. First, the fight takes place on an airship, which in itself is really fun, despite being somewhat small. However, as the game progresses, the fighters will eventually have to make their way through a long track in the sky with several different types of platforms, ones that move, ones that fall, and ones that disappear. At the end of this course, the players will fall back onto the airship to repeat the whole process over again. And that's it. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to this stage when compared to stages like the PictoChats and WarioWare Inc., but this is just a fun little moving stage, and there's nothing wrong with that. It also has a lot of nostalgic value to me. Not only do I love Super Mario 64, but this stage was my favorite one to play in Melee, and it's held up really well after all this time. And so, Rainbow Cruise is easily my number 1 favorite Super Smash Bros. Stage of all time. So there you have it, my ranking of every Super Smash Bros. Stage. For more videos like this, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, please check out my social media. All links are in the description. A smashing thank you for watching, loves! See you in the next one. Mikoro out.